Hey everyone, Dio here. We're jumping straight into an urgent security briefing today. If you've been tracking the situation in Oyo State, you already know the Aharo Asinle school abduction is dominating the headlines. But look, in any crisis, the truth is usually the very first casualty. As a security analyst, my goal today is to help you cut right through all the static, the wild rumors, and the sensationalism, so we can look at the hard, verified facts on the ground. Right now, there's a massive amount of noise out there about what these captors actually want. So we're going to methodically break down a brand new piece of intelligence, a newly released video that literally flips our entire understanding of this situation on its head. Let's get right into the facts.
Okay, let's dive into this. We've got a direct quote from the school's principal, Mrs. Rachel Alamu, pulled straight from this newly surfaced video. And I really want you to listen to her words carefully here. She's speaking directly from Captivity, addressing the public and the press, and she flat out says media outlets are complicating the issue. Guys, this is a massive piece of primary intelligence. For weeks, the public has been whipped into this absolute frenzy by reports of a staggering 1 billion naira ransom, plus these highly politicized demands for nationwide Sharia law. But right here, the principal herself is stepping up to completely shatter that misinformation. This isn't just a minor correction, right? It's a desperate plea to make sure the authorities and the public are dealing with the actual reality of their situation, not some media fabrication that could completely derail their chances of getting home safely.
To really grasp why Mrs. Elamu's clarification is an absolute game changer, we have to look at the stark contrast in these demands. For weeks, media reports have been pushing this narrative of a 1 billion naira ransom and the imposition of Sharia law. Now, those are massive, almost insurmountable demands, requiring huge national policy shifts and astronomical amounts of money. Think about it. If you're a security agency planning a rescue based on those reports, your entire strategy is going to be completely skewed. But the verified demands? They're entirely different. The captors are actually just asking for the release of some of their members who are currently locked up in government custody. As an analyst, I can tell you this fundamentally shifts the whole nature of the crisis. We aren't dealing with a simple kidnapping for a massive payday anymore, and we definitely aren't dealing with a grandiose national ideological overhaul. No, we're looking at a highly targeted prisoner exchange.
As we analyze this demand, step one is recognizing this major shift in tactics. We've officially moved from an assumed financial motive over to a logistical one. Step two is identifying that specific demand, releasing detained members. This right here tells us the group responsible is organized enough to have a running roster of their captured affiliates, and they're coordinated enough to use innocent school children as leverage to get them back. And step three is understanding that the target of their leverage is directly aimed at government custody. This isn't a problem a local community leader or a wealthy family can just solve with a bag of cash, not at all. This places the burden of resolution squarely and exclusively on the shoulders of the federal and state governments who actually hold these detainees.
So let's pull back for a second and map out the spatial and temporal reality of this crisis, because this didn't just happen overnight. It all started back on May 15th when gunmen invaded schools in Aharo Asinle and the neighboring communities in the Oriendre local government area of Oyo State. And they didn't just grab one or two people. They took scores of pupils, teachers, and residents. And then we get this massive, agonizing gap of time leading up to June 8th, which is when this clarifying video finally dropped. Walking through this sequence really helps us understand the sheer duration of the intelligence vacuum that allowed all those false media reports to spread like wildfire. Because, when there's silence, speculation is always going to fill the void.
I want to pause right here. 24. That is the exact number of days these victims had been held in captivity by the time Mrs. Alamu spoke in that June 8th video. I just want to let that number sink in for a moment, because it is arguably the most important piece of data we have. As analysts, it is so easy for us to get caught up in the geopolitics, the tactics, and the high-level negotiations, but 24 days. That means 24 long nights of severe personal strain, exposure, and absolute terror for these school children, the educators, and the local residents. It represents the unimaginable anguish of their families waiting back home. The psychological toll of surviving 24 days in the hands of armed captors literally cannot be overstated, and it dictates the extreme urgency with which this entire situation needs to be handled.
And that raw urgency brings us directly to Mrs. Alamu's specific appeals. Notice exactly who she's talking to here. She makes a direct call to President Bola Tinubu at the federal level, and then another direct call to Oyo State Governor Say Makinde at the state level. She is pinpointing the exact individuals who actually have the executive authority to authorize a prisoner release from government custody. But honestly, her most critical plea is for peaceful resolution. She's specifically begging the authorities to use peaceful means to secure their freedom.
She knows exactly what kind of environment she's in, and she is actively warning against some kinetic, guns-blazing military escalation that could end up getting the victims caught in the crossfire. She's explicitly advocating for negotiation. And this brilliantly illustrates one of the absolute most concerning aspects of this whole ordeal. When we take a look at the key stakeholders, the Oyo state government and the security agencies, their official reaction status to these verified claims is just a chilling clinical void. As of the time these reports were filed, the authorities have not publicly addressed this demand to release detained members at all. They haven't even publicly acknowledged the debunking of the 1 billion naira rumor. Now, whether this silence is some highly calculated move for operational security during delicate backdoor negotiations or just a sign of sheer bureaucratic paralysis, the effect on the ground is exactly the same. It just amplifies the terror and the fear of the community.
We need to zoom out a bit now because what happened in the Oriore local government area is definitely not happening in a vacuum. This is about a much larger macro threat. The Aharo Esinle abduction is a really painful symptom of a broader, rapidly rising insecurity that's threatening the fundamental safety of schools and rural communities right across the country. Think about the implications. When armed groups can just roll in, invade an educational institution, abduct scores of people, and hold them for over 3 weeks just to force the government's hand in a prisoner exchange, it exposes a massive systemic vulnerability. It tells us that our schools, which are supposed to be the absolute safest sanctuaries for our youth, are now being actively used as soft targets and strategic leverage points by militant factions.
Which brings us to the final, critical question that I really want to leave you with today. As armed groups continue to ruthlessly target these vulnerable rural communities, how can our educational institutions possibly survive under the constant shadow of these abductions? I mean, if the basic physical safety of teachers and pupils cannot be guaranteed, the very foundation of education and community development in these regions is at risk of total collapse. We've separated the facts from the fiction today. We know for sure they want a prisoner release, not a billion naira. We know the timeline. We see the deafening silence of the authorities. But that ultimate question of how we actually protect these schools moving forward, that remains dangerously unanswered. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking those hard questions, stay focused on the verified facts, and I'll catch you next time.